Hello, and welcome to Tim's Reflections from Ohio, a YouTube video series where we talk about and reflect on stories from the Bible, parables that Jesus told, and the like. Today, our reflection is going to come from two places. One is we're going to begin reading in Mark chapter 5, verse 21, and we'll read from verse 21 down through the end of the chapter. And it says, Now when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet, and begged him earnestly, saying, My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live. Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and had suffered many things from many physicians, and she had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. And immediately the fountain of her blood dried up, and she felt it in her body that she was healed of the affliction. Picture this. This woman had been sick with this issue. It says a flow of blood for 12 years. It says she had suffered many things from many physicians. It says she had spent all that she had and was no better, but grew worse. She spent all of her money with the doctors trying to get well, and she was only worse. She was no better. But she heard about Jesus, and she believed if she touched his clothes, she'd be made well. And it says she was healed of her affliction. And then in verse 30, and Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, Who touched my clothes? But his disciples said, You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, Who touched me? And he looked around to see her who had done this. For the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. And while he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house who said, Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? And it says, As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, Do not be afraid, only believe. And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult, and those who wept and wailed loudly. When he came in, he said to them, Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And then it says, They ridiculed him. But when he put them all outside, he took the father and mother of the child and those who were with him, and entered where the child was lying. Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, Talitha cumi, which is translated, Little girl, I say to you, arise. Immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age, and they were overcome with great amazement. For he commanded them strictly that no one should know it, and said that something should be given her to eat. So here we have this little girl had died. Jesus came and he said, took her by the hand, and he said, Little girl, I say to you, arise. And it says immediately the girl arose and walked. She was, the woman with the issue of blood was healed. This little girl was raised from the dead. Miracles were happening in Jesus' time. And sometimes it's easy to think, well, that was Bible time. It was different then. And we miss the fact that miracles are still happening today. Prayers are still being answered today. And I have a story I want to read. I read this story years ago in a book that I have, and I misplaced the book, and I was wondering where did that book go? And I finally found it. I had it stored away with some other books, and the book is called It Must Have Been an Angel. And this book is miracle stories, angel stories, answer to prayer stories, and the like are in this book. And there is a story here that ever since I first read it, it's stuck in my mind over the years. And it says it happened in a little cabin in Anchorage, Alaska on a cold February morning. Mrs. Louise Dubé was alone and so badly crippled she could not walk without applying hot and cold treatments to her leg. The cabin was heated by a wood-burning cook stove. She had many friends, but this morning, for some reason, no one had remembered to visit her and bring in a fresh supply of wood. If you think about it, people that have a wood stove, they have to keep a fresh supply of wood in the house. It says, and she couldn't call anyone because she had no telephone at that time. In her desperation, she began to pray aloud. Never before had she prayed so earnestly, but no one came. Finally, the last of the wood was gone and the fire went out. It was 30 degrees below zero. The cabin began to chill rapidly, and she knew that, even protected as she was by blankets, she would soon freeze to death unless someone came and brought in wood for her. She kept praying, but no one came. And then she prayed a different kind of prayer. She told the Lord that if it was his will that she freeze to death, it was all right. She was willing. About that time, the door opened. The cabin had only one door, and in walked a tall young man carrying an armload of wood. He was not dressed as most people dressed in Alaska during the winter months. He had on a black hat and a black overcoat. He put the wood in the wood box and proceeded to make a fire in the stove. When the fire was burning well, he put water in the big tea kettle and placed it over the fire. At this time, he seemed to keep his face turned so that she could not see his full face. He turned now and went out the door, returning shortly with another armload of firewood. She still had not really seen his face, nor had he said a word. Naturally, Mrs. Dubé was awed by all of this, so much so that she could not speak. She just sat there and looked at him, all the while wanting to ask him if he was an angel, yet afraid to speak up. Finally, she asked him that question in her mind, without saying a word aloud. And when she did that, he turned toward her, smiled, and nodded his head. His face was so noble, she said, she knew that he was not from this world. He turned, opened the door, and left without saying a word. For a time she just sat there as if petrified. Finally she thought, if he is an angel sent from God, there will be no footprints in the snow outside the door. So she forced herself to hobble to the door, opened it, and looked out on the unruffled snow. There were no footprints. Neither had the snow been disturbed over or around her little pile of wood. The snow was perfectly smooth and rounded over as always after a snowstorm. And she knew that God had answered her prayer. The prayer that she said, God, if it's your will that I die and freeze to death, it's okay. I'm willing. When she prayed that prayer, God sent this angel to bring in wood for her to save her life. I want us to remember that miracles still happen today. Miracles still happen in our world. They're not just from Bible times. They're still happening today. And whatever it is that you're dealing with, whatever it is that's going on in your life or your family or your workplace, whatever, God can still work it out. He is still active. He hasn't pulled away from this world to say, you want to run it on your own, go to it. That's not God's way. He is there to help his children when they need help, just like any loving father would do. If you've been blessed by the reflection, please, as always, hit that thumbs up button, leave a comment. I always enjoy reading those comments. And remember this, God loves you. He loved Mrs. Dubé so much that he sent an angel to save her life. And he loves you so much that there's a couple of things. One is that he sent his son to die on a cross for you. But he also loves you so much that he is still there. He's been with you. He is still waiting for us, you, me, all of us, to come to him, to bring our worries and our cares to him, to leave these things with him, our burdens. Sometimes we're so worried and we're so afraid and we're not sure what to do, but he is still there for us, and he's waiting us to come to him and say, God, help me. Just like the woman with the issue of blood, she thought, if I could just touch his garment, I'll be made well. Just like Mrs. Dubé, giving it all up for God. It's that he's there for us. Don't ever forget how much he loves you. I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for viewing the video. Have a blessed week, and remember how much God loves you.